Hey everyone, welcome to the Easter Pod. Whether you're new to the podcast or a longtime listener, I just want to say thanks for listening, and I'm glad to have you here. I'm your host, Corey Easterday, and today's show is a pretty exciting one. I was recently a virtual attendee of the Charlotte Podcast Festival, and that's where I met today's guest, Taylor Fraser, and got to hear all about her new audio drama podcast called Foreward. Taylor is the writer and director of Foreward, which chronicles one family's story after the tragedy of a school shooting. The Foreward podcast was released on New Year's Day of 2021 and features an astonishing 70 actors and composers, editors. So many people were involved with this project, and many of the actors themselves perform characters that are based loosely on real people. As you'll hear during our conversation, the Foreward podcast is really personal for Taylor because it's based on her real-life experience of being a sophomore in high school when her small town in Colorado was unfortunately rocked by a deadly school shooting. Taylor herself has had a really fascinating career leading up to this, as she has directed, produced, and edited many projects. We're talking everything from major motion pictures to music videos to short films to television productions. Taylor's projects, in fact, have even resulted in nominations and wins for 5 Oscars, 9 Emmys, and 5 Golden Globes. Really, really incredible stuff that she's been a part of, and we cover that in the episode, and many more things. Taylor and I recorded our conversation before the release of Foreward, so you'll get to hear some of her thoughts leading up to the release of the podcast, in addition to all the behind the scenes that went into making it happen. As we've already, as you can probably tell, it was a really big production, a lot of people involved. So I will say it's been, since its release, since Foreward has come out, it's been really cool to watch it, the podcast climb the charts on iTunes and see how positively listeners have responded. As is typical for an episode of the Easter Pod, if you are someone that's listened before, Taylor and I dive deep on a number of fascinating topics. And I really enjoyed talking through so much of the creative process, everything that went into Foreward, and just orchestrating the whole project. And I really honestly appreciated Taylor's willingness to talk through her own process of healing from trauma after experiencing such a tragic event growing up, and how she's dealt with that, and how Foreward is kind of a product of that, and her efforts to connect that story with maybe other people that have been through something similar. Before we dive in and get to our conversation, just a quick reminder that if you like the show, if you like the Easter Pod, please be sure to follow us on social media at the Easter Pod. And if you are a new listener, or maybe you've missed a few episodes, be sure to listen back through our other episodes. We've got, this is our 16th episode that you're listening to right now, and it was a year ago that I finally decided to pursue my own podcast dream. I had no idea what we were getting into with 2020, so I've been doing this basically all from home over Zoom and stuff like that ever since the start of the podcast, and I truly can't believe that we already have 16 incredible episodes in the library. Our guests, they come from a variety of different backgrounds and industries. I often feel like I'm kind of a jack of all trades myself, and so I find myself having interests in a lot of different topics and have gotten to network and connect with a lot of really cool people. So we've had some amazing guests. All of them have been amazing, and they've been willing to give so much insight and share about what they do and just kind of their thoughts on different topics. So be sure to check all those episodes out. And most importantly, be sure to listen and subscribe to Foreward. Foreward is spelled Foreward, so Foreward, Foreward, and you can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to, when you do listen to Foreward, be sure to give it a great rating, leave an awesome review. Taylor and her team have put a ton of work into this project, and they've done an incredible job. So leave them a 5-star rating. We won't settle for less than 5 stars here with the Easter Pod. All our guests get 5 stars. And write out some good notes for them. Tell them how much you appreciate Foreward and what you're listening to. And you can follow along on social at Foreward Podcast. Foreward Podcast. At Foreward Podcast on social. one last shout out to my friends, the Talbot brothers. They provided the opening music to the Easter Pod, so make sure to follow them also at Talbot Brothers on social and go check out their music. And hey, we're promoting a lot of stuff in this episode. While you're in a generous mood, please be sure to give the Easter Pod a rating. Again, I can't make you leave 5 stars. I know it would mean a lot to me if you did. That's all I'm going to say. Leave us a rating, leave a review, and also be sure to subscribe. We're going to have more episodes coming up in the future with incredible guests that you won't want to miss. So thank you again for listening, and without further ado, my conversation with Taylor Fraser. Well, I am very excited to bring in our guest today on the Easter Pod. As you heard in the intro, she's had a super interesting career working on a lot of really cool projects, including her newest project, an audio drama called Foreward, which we're definitely going to dive more into Foreward and some of the other projects she's done throughout her career a little later in the episode. But first, Taylor Fraser, welcome to the Easter Pod. How are you doing today?
Hey, Corey, I'm doing really good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming on. One thing we should mention up top is that you're my first guest from Colorado, which is a big deal to me because Colorado is one of my absolute favorite states. I've had the pleasure of traveling to Colorado a whole bunch, have some friends and family out there. It's a really great area. And I even have a few friends from there who regularly listen to the pod, or at least they download it. I don't know. They may not actually listen, but we appreciate the downloads nonetheless. So, but if they do listen, I'm sure they'll be stoked to hear this interview from one of their own. What do you enjoy most about living in Colorado? What are some of your favorite things to do there?
So I've grown up in Colorado, so I've been here since I was a second grader. And I think when I was a little kid, I was very into snow and elk. And I am not anymore, not as an adult. And there's been phases of my life where I'm like, I'll try some other place on for size. But at the end of the day, I always end up coming back to Colorado because there are a lot of cool things about being here. And my family's here, which is really cool. My brother lives directly across the street, which is lucky and unusual. And when we're not in weird COVID times, there's so many cool things to do here between the Botanic Gardens and the Denver Art Museum and all these really cool restaurants and bars and beautiful places that you can drive. And and the hot springs. The hot springs are the best.
Where are the hot springs?
My favorite hot spring is in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. It's called Strawberry Springs, and you drive up this dirt road up until the middle of nowhere, and so there's no light pollution at all, so you can see such a massive amount of stars. It is so beautiful. I would highly recommend it. But there's a lot of hot springs in Colorado. I would think at least 15 pretty big ones.
Oh, wow. I think I knew. I haven't been to one, but I think I knew that. I have to say, so one thing I'm always curious about, have you gotten to go see any shows at Red Rocks?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's one of the coolest venues in the whole world. I've seen some amazing shows there. Norah Jones, Gregory Alan Isaacoff. It's a magical place. I mean, for people who haven't been there, it's these giant red rocks that came up out of the earth, I assume, in prehistoric times. And so it's kind of this naturally perfect acoustic space. And so you're sitting out there in nature watching the moon rise over these incredible musicians. It is the coolest.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to see a show there. In fact, my first time ever actually going to Red Rocks was about a month and a half ago when my wife Megan and I went out for a safe vacation to go see some of our friends in Colorado who live kind of around that area. And I just felt so much irony in going to Red Rocks during the time of COVID and it being practically deserted. And
it's so sad.
It was very sad. I'm a musician. I love going to shows. I love being in that environment. So to go to the iconic Red Rocks for the first time in the time of COVID was it was a good experience. It's a great venue. I agree, but it would definitely be cool to go see a concert there one day.
Oh man. Well, so for a little while I was doing an Airbnb out of my house, and so I have this giant list of like, these are all the cool places to visit, and these are all the best restaurants, and these are all the best bars, and these are the best concert venues. I'm going to send you that list because you have not seen Colorado until you've seen a concert at Red Rocks, and you have to go to a hot spring. I can't believe you've not been to a hot spring. What?
So we've been up through I think it's the Rio Grande National Forest, and if I remember that correctly, in southern Colorado. Coming up through like Arizona or whatever. I remember I've driven a couple times, like coming from south to north, and all the great, there's so many great stops and sites and mountains along the way. We've been to Rocky Mountain a handful of times because my wife's cousin lives kind of close to that area. But so I've gotten to experience like a decent amount of Colorado's majestic beauty. But I would really appreciate a list like that of all those places. Because I love to travel, so I've done a similar thing where I've started to keep like on a notes app all the places I go to whenever I travel, so I can give out some of those recommendations. But definitely would have to check out a hot spring, and would love to get that guide that you mentioned from your Airbnb days, so that whenever get to travel there again, check out some of that cool stuff. That would be awesome. So how we got connected actually is through something called the Charlotte Podcast Festival, which is where I first discovered your work. And you even got to pitch Foreward, your new audio drama we mentioned. You got to pitch it to like a podcast Shark Tank that they did, and a lot of the attendees at the festival, including myself. What prompted you to attend the Charlotte Podcast Festival, and what were some of the big takeaways for you?
So I'm in a women's networking group called Ladio, like ladies on the radio, get it? And it's this really cool group of women who work in entertainment, and so they're always posting interesting things. And one of the things they mentioned was the Charlotte Podcast Festival, which was a really cool thing, and generally they do it in person, but this year, because of the pandemic, they did it remotely, and so anyone could register who wanted to. So I believe they had 14,000 people register from all over the world. So you'd go into these sessions, and for a week they taught you about like the technical part of podcasting, and for a week they taught you about like the marketing of podcasting, and for a week they did different themes. And every time all these people would pop up from like, I'm from Australia, I'm from Indonesia, I'm from where, and that was really cool. And then at the end they did a podcast Shark Tank, which was a neat thing because they kind of emailed anybody who'd registered and said, hey, if you are interested in pitching, throw your name in the ring. And so I emailed them and said like, yeah, I would love to do that. But I didn't think they'd pick me out of so many thousands of people. And then next thing I know, they're calling my name and I'm like, because the folks that are on the panel are very smart, very successful people who've worked on really big productions, including stuff for NPR. And, it's kind of like the dream to get to have advice from people like that who are in the biz. So yeah, that was really cool. And then they would do happy hours where we could connect with other people who were podcasting. And Corey and I ended up in the same group. So that was really cool because we got to talk shop. And some of the people in there have like never heard of a podcast, and some people are like very successful podcasters. And it was fun for Corey and I to chat because I think Corey's a little ahead of the game of where I'm at, but we're both like, okay, we're doing this. We take it seriously. So it was cool to get to have that conversation with him.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, use that term, ahead of the game. I definitely don't feel like I'm ahead of the game, but I'll take the compliment nonetheless. But I know what you mean. It was so cool to be able to connect with someone like yourself and other podcasters that, are really going for it. And I just loved I loved everything about the Charlotte Podcast Festival, but I loved the idea of how they did it and how they really started from that kind of phase one of, so, what does a download even mean was like one of the class titles, all the way to, how to edit your episode, to how to monetize them and promote them. I mean, they really covered it from start to finish. And I just thought it was so cool to be able to connect with other podcasters like yourself. And for me, I'm in the Charlotte area, which is how I heard about it. So my wife and I just moved here like 2 years ago. After, I lived in Ohio my whole life, as people who listen to this podcast are well familiar with my love of all things Ohio and Charlotte, quite honestly. It's a great city, but it was cool to be able to connect with people that are in this area and just see the vast amount of creative people that live here, that do work here, that do great work in audio. And I thought it was so cool that you got that opportunity on the podcast Shark Tank, because like you said, they're people that are in very high esteem. So to be able to get that feedback was awesome. And what was there a class aside from the Shark Tank or the happy hour? Was there like a particular class you took that you found to be really useful or that stood out to you?
Oh gosh, they were all really useful because, as you know, most of my career is in film. So for about 10 years, I've been working in the film industry. And so I think in some ways there is overlap, and I could go, okay, well, I know how to do this because I know how to produce a film, so I know how to produce a podcast. And there is a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot that is very, very, very different. And so it was invaluable to go to the Charlotte Podcast Festival because most of the people who are like really making their way in the podcast world are journalists. And I didn't go to journalism school. So there's a lot of things that they're talking about of like, oh, well, you need a pitch deck and you need a whatever. And I'm like, a what? Oh, I need a what? So it was really helpful feedback to go, okay, sometimes my film background comes in really handy, and sometimes I have a lot to learn.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was in a band for 7 years, primarily a drummer. So I learned how to do some of the other audio type things, but my main focus was always on playing drums and trying to master the drums. So diving into the podcast world, there was some stuff like you mentioned that I had some familiarity with, but I've really been learning as I go a lot. And what was cool is that a lot of the classes affirmed stuff that I've been learning about podcasting just in the process of doing it, but they also help me realize how I can kind of take the vision for the Easter Pod or what we're trying to do here to the next level. And one of the big pieces of that for me is really crafting the vision and crafting what this is about and what kind of space I want it to be in a more precise manner. Because when I started it, as people that have listened up to this point will know, I really had this kind of overarching view of like, all right, I love pop culture, I love music, I love sports, I love talking to people and hearing their stories. And so it kind of contained all those things. And as time has gone on, it's been cool in that creative process to see how it's morphed into like, it's really about the focus on empathy and storytelling and just kind of that connection between people. So the festival was just great. And to anyone listening that would be interested in something like that, I know on the Charlotte Podcast Festival website, they have all the classes that you can go download and listen to. So I would highly recommend checking some of that out. Now, you mentioned your career in film and some of the stuff you've worked on. And your creative career I find really interesting. And I find myself relating to it a lot because I'm someone that's held different jobs, different positions, kind of worked on different projects. I find myself being a jack of all trades of sorts. And some days I really like that and it's very exciting, and other days I wish I could just focus on kind of one thing like other people seem to do and just be really good at that one thing. But can you take myself and our listeners on the journey from where your career started working with the Oceanic Preservation Society to where you are now?
Sure. I think you're totally right. I think if you work in film or audio, you have to wear a lot of hats. If you live somewhere like LA or New York, then you can kind of pick one and focus in. But if you live anywhere else, then you're expected to be able to do every single piece of the puzzle, which is, absolutely what's happened throughout my career. So I started my career at the Oceanic Preservation Society, which is the company who made The Cove, which maybe you've seen. It's about the dolphin slaughter in Taiji, Japan. So it's heavy, but a very good film. And then after that, we made Racing Extinction. And then more recently, they've made a film called The Game Changers, which I got to be involved in kind of a peripheral way in that. That one was about vegan athletes. But anyway, after we made Racing Extinction, which is a film about like why are so many animals going extinct at such a rapid rate, and like we kind of explored climate change. We got to talk to all these really smart scientists, and the man that was doing the audio on that project had his own recording studio, and before I knew it, he'd brought me in to work with him. And so then my career took me in a whole other direction because one of our clients lived in rural Montana, And they decided they were going to open an art center on this giant piece of land. So he had bought multiple ranches, and then he called up the best sculptors in the whole world and said, like, hey, can you put a giant piece of land art on my property so I can make an art center? And so he did. And then every time a new sculpture would be installed, I would drive from Colorado to Montana and film the installation and make these little documentaries about whichever sculptor was doing his thing or her thing. And then at the same time, they were building a music venue on the property. So there were all these classical musicians, like the best in the world, who would come and do concerts in this little town in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And that was also my job, was to record the concerts, do interviews with the musicians. So I was doing like film stuff in Montana for a while. And then I decided that I didn't want to be in Montana for the rest of my life. So it was time to take the leap of faith. And so I went to Los Angeles. And when I was in LA, I had a really cool opportunity where I got to cut movie trailers. So then my career shifted where I was mostly doing editing, whereas early on I was mostly doing producing, which is like herding the cats, you know, like organizing all the behind the scenes stuff. But the LA thing was very exciting, and also not very sustainable. And your hours are nuts and your pay is not good, and you work till 3 a.m. on a pretty regular basis. And so eventually I was like, you know what? Like I want to have friends and I want to have a house, and I just didn't feel like a sustainable place for me to be long term. So I decided to come back to Colorado, where I got a normal job in marketing for a little while. And then I decided that it was time to start my podcast. And that brings us to where we are today. I've been thinking about making a podcast for many years. And really the quarantine gave me the time and the resources to finally be like, do it. So I have been working on creating an audio drama podcast, and it's based on my real story of my life. And that story, in my perspective, really begins when I was 15 years old and there was a shooting at my high school. And so that is where the story begins. And if you're curious about the podcast, there's a trailer on the Foreward podcast website, so you can kind of get the gist of what it is that I'm creating. But it's intense, and it tells the real, true story from my perspective of somebody who was there and is still experiencing the trauma of the aftermath of this thing that happened in our town. And I wanted to tell the story of like, what does a person's life look like 10 years later? How does that person heal or not?
That is a very heavy topic. It's an important story to tell, and I'm glad you're telling it. When I first heard about what you were doing with Foreward and the fact that it was an audio drama, it's a very interesting story, just in an objective sense. But I think what makes it a story that myself and a lot of others will be drawn to is kind of the unfortunate reality that it's a bit of a universal theme when you talk about school shootings, or, you know, being around a traumatic experience like that in general, going through something like that that's very traumatic. As a matter of fact, when you and I chatted via Zoom during one of the podcast happy hours, you mentioned that as you've worked on Forward, as you've engaged in the process of creating this audio drama, this podcast series, how you also found this story to be more universal than you realized. And I shared with you then, and I'll briefly share with our listeners now, about 8 years ago, I was in a Las Vegas casino when someone came in with a gun and killed another person before killing themselves. And it happened fairly close to where myself and our friend and my friends were standing. And without getting into a ton of detail about it, it was definitely one of the more traumatic moments I've experienced. What have you been processing as you hear all these other stories that are similar to the one that you're telling, similar to your story?
God, Corey, I just even hearing you say that now makes me like want to cry, because that it's unreasonable that so many people I know have been in a situation like this. It is absolutely insane. And what you said is exactly true. I didn't think that this was going to be a universal story when I started. I thought this is going to be a really niche audience thing. But every actor that has come to work with me, and there are 67 of them, every single one has been connected to some sort of instance of violence, whether that be that they're a teacher and so they've encountered lockdown situations and they didn't know if it was real or not, or they're a parent and their child went to school and they were in a lockdown situation and they didn't know if it was real or not, or they're married to someone who survived Columbine and that person is still feeling the aftermath of that situation so many years later. Unfortunately, violence is something that most people in the United States are familiar with, and it seems, to me, it seems wrong that it is a normal thought in our heads of like, I'm going into a movie theater, I should look for the exits because something horrible might happen while I'm here. The idea that you could go into a casino or you could go into a school or somewhere that is supposed to be safe and it isn't, and that is so disturbing to me. That's a reality for most people in the United States.
I agree. It is an incredibly sad reality. And just the fact that, it's something that's so commonplace that we can talk about it. And even people, like you said, the 67 actors that are working on this story with you, all having some kind of connection to it. And then I bet for, even the people that are listening to us chat right now, I know there's probably at least a few out there that have some kind of connection, even if it's just tangentially or, the way they've processed all these stories that happen nationally. It's something that's impacted each and every one of our lives here in the United States. And it can be a very tough subject to talk about and cover because of that. And so, like I said, I think it's incredible that you're going there, that you're telling that story, that you're focusing on that. Of all the mediums you've worked in, because you have worked with a lot of creative mediums, I know you said part of it was wanting to get into podcasting, but what do you think it is about the medium of podcasting? We were just at the Charlotte Podcast Festival. Like you said, 14,000 registrations. There's 1 million podcasts on Apple Podcasts. It's become a very, it's a medium that a lot of people are flocking to tell their important stories. What made you choose podcasting as the medium to tell your story? What do you think it is about it that offers you the platform to share what you want to share?
Now, there's so many things about it that are really, really make it a cool and accessible option. One is that there's no barrier to entry. I mean, when I was working in documentary film, you would spend millions of dollars making your film, and then you would go to a film festival like Sundance, for instance, and then you would pitch over and over and over and over until somebody was like, I think your idea is good enough that I'm going to fund it. And then hopefully, maybe, fingers crossed, you make your money back. And that means that, like, not everyone can just create a documentary. Like, not everyone has the means to do that. Not everybody has the team to do that. No, you might not have the education in film to be able to do that. But podcasts, like, anyone can do it, which is, a good thing and a bad thing, because unfortunately there are so many podcasts that you have to wade through a lot of muck to find the good ones. And of course there are some that are very good that stand out in the crowd. I think yours is one of them. But there's just so many that it's hard to necessarily know like what's good and what isn't. So that's the tricky part. But I do think it's really cool that, I can't create a film by myself. Like, someday I would love for what I've created to turn into a television series. I think it'd make a really interesting television series. But by myself, I can't do that. But I can do a podcast. And even during the times of COVID, I can do it safely. And I can have my actors like go into their little recording space and I'm in a totally separate room so they can do their thing and they can do it safely. And the part about podcasting that I think is a really neat emotional thing is that you can't see the person. So sometimes their emotion comes across in a different way, in a more vulnerable way, because when they're like in their little room by themselves acting, it's like they lose inhibition and they're able to really become that character without anyone looking at them or being creepy. So you can really coach them like, I need you to go to the deepest, darkest place that you've ever been in your life, and there's no one watching them. You can just hear them, which really requires a different level of talent because they have to be very, 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 very good to get that emotion across in just their voice. But, when they do, it is such a magical, very cool thing.
Podcasting is a very intimate medium, and you're telling a very intimate story emotionally, like you said. And I've listened to the trailer for Foreward, And I've seen people commenting on it about how affected they are by it in a good way, because I think you've done a good job just within that trailer, and why I'm excited to ultimately listen to the series. You've done a good job capturing just some of the emotional tension that comes from a traumatic experience like that and how people are processing it just within that trailer. And so kudos to you and to the actors. And I think it's really fascinating, too, that you've chosen the audio drama subgenre of podcasting also, because, interview style is and audio drama styles and podcasting it can be very different from one another, but you're doing this audio drama in such a way that you're basing it on your real life experience, on a real story. Some of the details and some of the different things have been changed and dramatized, but just within that trailer itself, you having actors to really come in and focus on, all right, we're going to capture the specific emotion. So there's a raw organic component to it, but there's also that scripted component, and it just encapsulates very well, I think, the story that you're trying to tell, kind of even in that subgenre. I think, you could speak better to this, but would you say that focusing on the audio drama style has enabled you to tell the story in a way that maybe if you were doing more of a journalistic style that you couldn't tell it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such an intense story. So when I started doing this project, I decided I was going to do an audio drama. And for those of you who don't know what an audio drama is, imagine that you're watching a television series like a Grey's Anatomy, except in our case, you're not going to be able to see the screen. You're just going to hear the voices of the actors, but they'll be talking to each other. They'll be moving from scene to scene. And technically it is fictionalized, although it is based on my true story. But in the process, I went and interviewed my mom, my dad, and my brother about their experience that day and the aftermath. And there are things that they said to me that I don't think they would have said if I would have been recording them. Because it is a very, very, very vulnerable thing to talk about. And we had not talked about it. For 14 years, we hadn't talked about where were you in the building? What did it feel like? What was that experience for you? And so I think I was able to get more authentic information from them, because they knew that, one, we were going to maintain their anonymity because I was going to change a lot of facts. So although the characters are based on them, there's a lot of components that have to shift because it's fiction, because I need to make the story fit. And, you're consolidating time. So in order to make these 4 characters all fit together, you're going to have to change some aspects. So I think it helps a little bit to get something that's more raw when no one's going to get to hear your voice. No one's going to get to see your face. We're going to have an actor portray this, and it's going to be my interpretation of that person. So, for instance, if the character who's loosely based on my mom, there are aspects of her that feel really real to me. But I am not my mom. I don't know what she felt in those moments. I know what she told me, but that doesn't mean I'm going to portray it exactly identically to how she felt. And there's going to be stuff that's changed inevitably because maybe as a teenage girl, I perceived it differently than she did. So I think there's some amount of self-protection that comes with creating something that's fiction rather than being like, tell me every single thing and it has to be fact and it has to be perfect and it's going to be really vulnerable and you might not want this out in the world and you're going to, it's a different dynamic, I think.
100%. That makes a lot of sense, because that's some of the consideration in the style of podcasting I'm doing is, anything that's shared could have could have kind of some real life effect because it is people sharing their stories, I'm sharing, etc. But yeah, that audio drama format gives you the opportunity to talk about some of the more difficult aspects of going through a traumatic experience like this in a way that kind of provides a safety net, for the people that are sharing. So that makes a ton of sense. If I can ask, how have you been able to process your own trauma from this lived experience? And maybe kind of a two-parter to add to that, what role has so how have you processed your own trauma as much as you're comfortable sharing in that regard from living through this experience? Has the podcast been part of that healing process for you? And if so, how?
Yeah. Oh, man. So doing this podcast has absolutely been the most useful thing I have done in all those 14 years for being able to cope with what happened. Is I think for a long time, I just didn't deal with it. I found ways to distract myself and become extremely busy so I didn't have to think about it, so I didn't have to acknowledge my pain. I did, I was having horrible nightmares, and that often is something that comes along with having PTSD. And so I was like, you know what? I'll just drink so much caffeine that I don't actually sleep, or I don't sleep soundly enough to dream. So I was doing things like that for years. I was pouring myself into my career in such an extreme way that I didn't have time to think about anything sad that had happened to me because I wanted and needed that distraction. And I guess it was about 3 years ago, I had a series of unfortunate events all happen in quick succession. And it was like, I just ran out of room in my psyche to deal with all the crazy shit. And it was like, all of a sudden I was like, I can't not acknowledge this anymore. Like, I have to fix this. So I didn't deal with it for a decade and made a lot of really strange choices as a result of trying to figure out how to distract myself. And then eventually realized, you need to talk to a therapist because you've never dealt with this. And so I did. And that was incredibly helpful. And I did that for about a year. I went every week to a therapist. And then in the process of creating this podcast, actually writing down the nitty gritty of what happened has been a really interesting experience. Because maybe like when you tell people like, oh yeah, I was in a school shooting, you create like a very abbreviated version of like, yes, this is what happened, so that you only have to talk about it for like a minute. And then you can change the subject because it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. But when you write a script that is 350 pages long about those 2 years of like what happened and then the aftermath, you have to not only talk about all of the details, every detail that you've never said out loud, you have to also talk about what were the nightmares, what was the stuff of your imagination that was horrifying, because that kind of stuff, you're not telling people about that. So for the first time in my life, I was writing all that down and getting it out of my system. And then I was having actors come in and I was having to coach them as to how to portray these horrible, horrible emotions that were mine. And that was a really strange experience. And it sort of makes it all feel less personal because you go, okay, like I'm taking it out of my psyche, I'm putting it into an actor, and then I'm letting them perform it. So yes, it is something that I have struggled with, but my actor has also struggled with some kind of extraordinary trauma that he or she had to overcome, and they're channeling it right now. This is not just about me, it's about them too. And yeah, and then now I'm at the editing point, and that's really strange because now you're listening to all this stuff that's been recorded, and you're listening to it on a loop, and choosing the best takes that have the most emotion. And that's really strange as well, because then you're listening to like what resonates. So, oh gosh, yes, doing this podcast has absolutely changed me, and it has been very weird, very effective therapy.
How have you seen it impact the actors you've worked with?
I think that the actors are touched by the subject matter because they can relate to it, unfortunately. I mean, I had an actress who is a teacher, and I had her play the 911 dispatcher role. And after we recorded together, she sent me this long series of texts, and one was a photograph of a handwritten note that her little girl had written her when she was in lockdown. And it just, broke my heart of like, whoa, I just asked this woman like, hey, let's play and pretend that you're a 911 dispatcher. And not 18 months beforehand, her own little girl had been in a real lockdown situation. And I think it's giving people an excuse to talk about this stuff. Because I think she was like, well, nobody died in that situation, so I need to just move forward. And I think a lot of people did that. Or some people say to me sometimes like, well, only one person died at your school, so it's not that big of a deal. And it's like, that's a huge deal. Are you kidding? Somebody died at my high school. Someone was murdered at my high school. That is a really, really big deal. And I think it's kind of empowering people to go, okay, it doesn't matter how many degrees of separation there were between you and something horrible that happened to you. You're allowed to have emotions about it, and you're allowed to be affected by it.
Yeah, listen, you and I both have experienced, and many people listening, many people in our world have unfortunately experienced traumatic events or traumatic moments, or had to deal with subjects like PTSD and trauma. And when having these conversations, I always want to be careful to be clear about, I'm not an expert on mental health. You're not a mental health expert. We're just sharing our personal experiences. We're trying to be vulnerable. We're trying to talk about what we've been through and the ways that we found to kind of process our lived traumas and PTSD experiences, ways we found that have been helpful. And this whole conversation, and I think, what you're doing with Foreward kind of at the heart of it, and what I've tried to do, having some of the conversations we've had on this podcast, at the heart of it is you just want people to know that they're not alone in what they've experienced, that there are safe places and should be where they can process their emotions, process what they've experienced, process things like trauma and PTSD, because, our world is such that we are kind of taught, and I think part of it's cultural in America, part of it, there's a million factors involved, but we're kind of taught to, when we're experiencing big emotions or we've been through difficult things, to kind of tamp it down, or, just keep plowing forward, keep on keeping on, just wake up, keep going. Like you said, like you mentioned kind of in your own story, we find things to distract ourselves. I just think we as humans in general, like, we can have difficulty processing a lot of the heavy stuff we've been through. And I think, having trauma and PTSD from the experiences of others, just what we see in some of the national conversations, when there's various school shootings that happen, that take the spotlight, those can be, they're certainly traumatic for those that have lived through them. And, they, to a lesser degree, well, it's not about degrees. It's just, it has an impact on all of us, whether you're actually there experiencing the event in real time, or maybe if it's just something you hear about and you're picking up on kind of those emotions, or it makes you feel sad or depressed, or it triggers other things you've been through. The bottom line is that it's a topic and an issue that we're talking about, that, both the specific thing, with violence in America, but also mental health and trauma and all that. It's something that touches all of us kind of in one way or another. So I think I'm always fascinated to hear how people have been able to kind of work through their own personal experiences as it relates to trauma and PTSD. It's something, you and I talked about beforehand, before we started recording. I've been through a lot of therapy myself. I strongly believe in therapy. I believe in advocating for a focus on mental health and people finding their places of healing, embracing starting their healing journey, or just continuing their healing journey, finding ways to talk about these emotions and that carry over from stuff we've been through. So I appreciate you sharing your own personal experience about processing your trauma from that experience. And I'm also curious kind of your perspective on, do you think that there is a stigma around mental health or processing things like trauma and PTSD? Do you think there's a stigma around that in general? And why do you think that is?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. And I think I'm fairly comfortable with talking about mental health stuff and advocating that, like, yes, therapy is a good thing. It is a healthy thing. And still, I was applying for like a producer role on a project the other day, and there's a box you have to check of like, do you have a disability? And out of curiosity, I was like reading through the things, and one of them that counts as a disability is depression or anxiety or PTSD. And it made me go like, I don't want people to think that I have like a disability that might affect my work, or like, it made me nervous to go like, ooh, I like, by admitting that I have sought therapy and that I have struggled with my mental health, I felt like I was admitting something that might make people go, oh, she's broken. And I think that's really sad, because really people who choose to go to therapy are doing the hard work. And those people are probably healthier people than all the people in the world who are not choosing to go to therapy. And it is sad that, yes, there is a taboo and there is a stigma around that of like, oh, is there something wrong with me that I can't handle this on my own? But these things are not normal, natural things. That is not normal that somebody walked into a casino and did what they did and that you witnessed it, or that somebody walked in my school and did what they did. Like, those are not things that we should just intuitively know how to deal with, because those are not normal things. It makes sense you'd need someone to guide you as to like some good coping mechanisms as to how to deal with that kind of stuff, because who on earth just is like, okay, I'm unscathed?
Yeah, and I think everyone has different coping mechanisms to deal with all the stuff life throws at you, some healthy, some unhealthy. We all have them. And I think it's so important to try and focus on the ones that are healthy, like going to therapy. Creativity, I think there's so much healing in doing art and creating. Like you said, you creating this podcast has been a really, healing experience. You've learned a lot about your own trauma through doing it. And it's always been interesting to me that there is such a stigma. I agree with you. I'm somebody that, if I'm being honest, I care a lot about what other people think of me. Some days I can control that better than others. Some days I can remind myself to have a healthier perspective on that. But some days I feel really insecure, and I feel like I want people to think the best of me, and I really care. And going to therapy has helped me to not only understand why that mentality exists, but it's helped me to navigate all the different ways that, you cope with going through difficult things in life, or, losing loved ones, being a part of traumatic events like we've kind of outlined. So yeah, I think I totally understand where you're coming from. And again, I can't thank you enough for sharing. And, these are things I really, we all have stuff. And I'm just a firm believer that whether you think you kind of need therapy or not, because I think there's kind of this idea that only the people with real big problems or issues go to therapy or talk about mental health or whatever. And I just don't know how. I think you said it. I think you used a great word for it. I don't know how any of us come out of this world, quote unquote, unscathed.
Yeah.
With all the stuff that goes on. So if I could kind of wave a magic wand, I think therapy would be accessible to everyone, that everyone would have the chance to be in therapy, and that everyone would have the chance to be connected with a really good therapist, because I think that it's important, especially in therapy, to find, it's still a human being. So it's important to find a good connection with someone.
Mm-hmm. And I also know a lot of people who are like, well, I went and it didn't work. And it's like, well, you might have gone to a bad one. They're not all great. There are a lot of them that are amazing, wonderful, incredible, life-changing experiences. And some of them aren't. Like, you have to, what you just said, you have to find somebody you have good chemistry with, or it's not going to be effective. If they just, keep letting you get away with whatever stupid stuff you're doing, then that's not good therapy. That's not helpful. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying and, find someone who is helpful for you.
Right, yeah. Just because you have a bad therapy experience doesn't mean they're all going to be that way, for sure. With the caveat that we're not mental health experts, just through all that you've been through all that you've described, if someone's listening and they're thinking, yeah, I can relate to what you are both talking about on any kind of level, what would you suggest to someone and you can, I'll let you choose the audience. So you can maybe speak in a general perspective to anyone that's kind of dealt with trauma or PTSD, or you can speak to maybe someone has an experience that's more similar to the story you're covering in Foreward. But what would you say to someone in general if the roles were kind of reversed and you were trying to help them maybe process what they've been through?
I wish I would have been introspective enough when I was younger to realize how many choices I was making because I hadn't coped with my trauma. I wish I would have gone to therapy sooner. And I think I was one of those people who, when I was a teenager and my parents realized ooh, she's struggling, they sent me to a therapist who was not a good therapist. And then from there on out, I was like, well, that's dumb. That's not useful. I'm not doing that. And then many, many, many years later, I did go to a good therapist and realized whoa, this is life altering. I think sometimes we just settle in and go, okay, well, that sucks that I can't sleep at night and I have horrible nightmares, or I guess that's just a reality for me that I'm going to have panic attacks on a regular basis. And that is not normal. And it doesn't matter where it's coming from. It might be some very, very normal, my job is stressful, or it might be something that's extremely traumatic. It doesn't matter. It is not fair that you are having panic attacks on a regular basis. And wherever that's coming from, there are therapists who can teach you better strategies so that when that starts to happen, you can slow it down or you can make it stop. There are ways that we can figure out how to take better care of ourselves so that we don't have to deal with feeling miserable all the time. And I think if I would have known that that was an option when I was younger, I would have absolutely tried to figure out okay, it may take me 10 different therapists before I find one that's the right one, but it would have been worth it. And I wish I would have understood that when I was younger, or for people who are just discovering it now when they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, it's never too late to go and try and have some like self-improvement stuff going on, because if it improves your life for any period of time, it's worth doing.
Yeah, for yourself, and then for what you have to give to others. Because when we, you know, I've always been a big believer in kind of the general phrase, you can't give what you don't have. And
yes.
That phrase maybe has some limits to it, but I think it's true in general that it's really hard for you to be the person you want to be in the world, or to be that kind of healing space for others, or be someone that shows that love to others if you're unable to give it to yourself.
Absolutely. And it affects other people as well. The fact that I was the master of distraction was messing up my friendships, it was messing up my relationship, it was messing up my bond with my family. Like, it extends a lot beyond just the individual.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of a common theme as we're talking about these things, is what we go through personally, or traumatic events that happen or whatever, it just extends beyond that immediate, like that immediate person or event is important, no doubt, but it has all these crazy butterfly effects. Like, it extends beyond us in so many ways. And I think the reverse is true. I think that's really important to note. The reverse of things being healing and good things in the world and positive things in the world, they help us, but then they extend beyond us also, which I think is important to note for sure. So what ultimately, so let's say someone has listened to Foreward from start to finish. What do you ultimately hope people take away from listening to Foreward?
Well, so I listened to a podcast on the daily a while back, and it was with a few young women who survived the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And they were so young. They were 15 years old, and I think I forget that, like, I was 15 when it happened to me, and when it happened to me, I was like, I was a grown-up. But they're not. You know, I'm, like, listening to these little girls talk about whatever, and, like, 15, you're still a child. And anyway, so they were talking about what happened to them and the aftermath, and they were saying, like, what is my life going to look like when I'm 20? And, I am turning 30 tomorrow. So, like, I know what it feels like to go through the aftermath, and I know it's not pretty, and I guess most importantly, I want people who have been through something traumatic to be able to listen to this and go, it gets better. It eventually gets better. And it's not linear for sure. Like, I have bad days still, but eventually these young women who were in the story, like, eventually they're not going to feel that miserable every single day. They will still feel miserable sometimes, but I want them to know that their emotions are normal and what they're experiencing is not out of the ordinary, and it's okay to seek help. Like, that's, at the end of the day, that's who I'm making this for, is people who've been through something awful, and I want them to be able to go, okay, I'm 15 now and life looks pretty grim, but when I'm 30, maybe things will be okay again. And that's at the end of the day, that's why I'm making this. I wish somebody would have told me that story when I was 15. I wish I would have known somebody who had survived the trauma, and I didn't. And I just thought, this is how it is from here on out. And I want to be able to provide that as a resource for people who are going, is this ever going to get better?
Well, first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you.
30 is a big deal. That's exciting. And I want to build on what you said about your purpose for creating this podcast and what you hope people take away from it. I think that's amazing. It really does my heart good to kind of hear that, to hear your perspective on it, to hear what you hope people take away. Because honestly, that at the end of the day, that's kind of what I believe in terms of the redemptive characteristics of humanity and the good that people carry within themselves. So you are someone where your story could have gone a very different way, even from what you experienced. And then, we're us both being in our 30s, we're still young, but we've lived a decent amount of life, enough that, like, we've been through several difficult things, So at each of those pivot points, your story could kind of go a different way, but you have taken your story on this path to where you are now, that you are trying to help others either start or continue on their own healing journey through producing something like this. And I think that's that's the thing that helps me continue to get up in the morning, like on those bad days or when, the struggle is real when it comes to mental health, is remembering that there's people like yourself out there, and there's tons of people out there that maybe they've been through difficult things, or maybe they just want to simply help people, but they're taking the things in our world that are tough or that are painful or whatever, and they're trying to be an active part of that redeeming process. They're trying to flip it on its head and say, this thing that was meant for evil, or that was not meant for anything, that was just pure trauma that just happened, that had no purpose to it, it was just a terrible thing. You're flipping that and you're saying, this can be used for good. This can be used for my own healing journey, but this can be used to help someone else. And I think that's extremely powerful. And those are the kind of things I look for and want to promote and want to focus on, because it's not saying that bad things don't happen, or that, we should just sweep things under the rug or pretend like things. It's the opposite. It's, as we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation, let's lean into that stuff. Let's go through the emotions of it. Let's talk about it so that we can use it for something that's good, so that somebody that listens to Foreward that has been through something similar can say, I feel maybe even a little less depressed, or a little less anxious, or just better, or I feel like I have more understanding about what I've been through because, Taylor was willing to go out on a limb, and all the actors and all the people that were involved, that are involved with Foreward, are willing to put themselves out there and create a project that's bigger than themselves, that can have a, really positive impact. Is that something you think about spinning it forward? Because this is dropping, Foreward comes out New Year's 2021. Have you thought about summer of 2021, fall of 2021, as it's been out there, have you thought about the positive effect that it could have?
Yeah, I think I have some nervousness around, I hope that it doesn't have a negative impact on people from my hometown. I hope that it is a reason to start having big conversations and not something that feels too personal. But yeah, absolutely. I have thought a lot about, like, what is this going to look like when it goes out into the world, and I really... Yeah, I hope it will. I think it will normalize some big emotions that people feel, and I hope that it's helpful for people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I hold that intention sometimes doing this podcast. Is my brain trends towards some of the anxious thoughts about, well, I don't want to have the opposite. I'm trying to have a positive impact. I don't want anything I do or say to have the opposite effect on anyone. So I totally get that, but I think that's kind of the scary thing, and also the beautiful thing about creating art, is that you create it, you put it into the world, and it kind of takes on a life of its own either way. So
yeah. I've had so much nervousness around, like, when am I going to start getting negative feedback? Which I will, inevitably. I will. I know that will be the case. That's okay. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, nor should it be. But I have been very pleasantly surprised by how many people have reached out to me and said, thank you for telling my story. No one has told this story for whatever reason. Like, there aren't good films, there aren't good television about the aftermath of something like this. And I think there are at least a few people that feel like I am finally allowed to say out loud that I was and still am sad. And I think that is a big deal, that suddenly people are going, like, I don't have to just go, my community is so strong and I am so strong, the end. It's like, no, it was bad. It was really, really bad. And it's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that, like, it's been a really hard road. And I think that is powerful just in and of itself, that I'm giving this, me not being afraid to talk about it is letting some other people feel less afraid to talk about it too. And I think that's really cool.
I agree. And I totally get that. I held myself back from doing or creating this podcast for like a solid 3 or 4 years, in part because in my head I was just anticipating any negative thing anyone could possibly have to say, or I was disqualifying myself. I was like, oh, you can't talk about this or do this, blah, blah, yeah, whatever. All the things we do that kind of, like, I think we do that a lot as just creative people or artists. We kind of disqualify ourselves from creating or doing the thing we want to do or create. But, I think some of those unintended or especially if you're a person that thinks more kind of in the negative, when you start to see some of the positive things that come forward, like you've said several positive things about the Easter pod to me during our conversation, and it just shows how long I still have to go when it comes to my own self-confidence, because every time I'm like, what? Oh, I would never anticipate that someone could
Oh gosh. But that's the thing, like we all have imposter syndrome of like, well, why me? A friend of mine, Lauren Dow, she's a very talented writer, and she's been writing a book, and soon she's going to release her book. It's about disordered eating. And sometimes she says things like, well, who am I to do this? It's not like I'm Brene Brown. And I was like, Brene Brown was a nobody until Brene Brown said she was somebody. Like if you're one of the few people who is willing to be brave and put something new and interesting out to the world, then like you are a Brene Brown in the making. Like all she did was say like, here I am, I have something interesting and smart to say, and she did it. Like, it's not like she's a superhero. Like, any of us are capable of saying something, putting something useful out into the world.
Well, that's why I try and promote the heck out of people that are doing cool things and want to share their stories and talk to them and, share what they're doing on social media, all that kind of stuff, because I applaud anyone. I think it's a hugely brave step. I applaud anyone willing to step out and create and do something. And yeah, the imposter syndrome is a real thing that so many of us struggle with, myself included. And the comparison monster can just get out of control, where I'm sure you've done it. I've done it with this podcast. You just think, well, but there's 100,000 things out there that somebody else has created that's similar to what I want to do that's better. And you just can't go down that road. And it's kind of, I always think of it as doing a little bit of mental jujitsu on myself to be like, all right, stop comparing, stop feeling like you don't belong, stop being afraid all the time, and just do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that holds back a lot of people from doing something really cool.
Exactly. And it shouldn't. So if you're listening and you've not yet started doing the thing you want to do it.
Yeah, agreed. For like 3 years, I make like vision boards on New Year's, and in the middle of it says, "Make your podcast, damn it!" And I finally did it. And this New Year's, I'm gonna be able to say like, it's done.
I love that so much, because I've definitely said the same. I haven't created a vision board, but I've definitely said the same thing to myself in my head before I started doing this. Oh, that's great. Well, pivoting just a little bit, I'd love to, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I'd love to end on just a bit of a different note, because I had a question from earlier I wasn't able to get to, and I am still curious, just because I'm a big pop culture and superhero nerd, and some of your credits include some of those Marvel and different superhero movies. I just have to ask, like, what was it like, getting to work behind the scenes on some of the biggest movies in Hollywood?
That was really a cool experience. And so I specifically worked for a trailer company. So I wasn't like actually making the Marvel movie, but how it works is that Marvel would send over all of the clips for Spider-Man, for instance. And so somebody had to edit it all together, because it was just like 1,000 clips. You can't make a trailer out of just like 1,000 random clips that are in no particular order. And so somebody's job would be to create what they call a rough cut. I didn't do that one in particular. I got to do the rough cut for Fargo season 3, which was very exciting. But yeah, and so when something from a company like Marvel comes in, of course they have like a code name, because they don't want everyone running around being like, I have access to Spider-Man, because an intern leaks that and like, woo, we're in trouble, because that's like millions, if not billions of dollars that's bad. But anyway, it was really cool, because often like, oh, you know what? So we were working on Batman at one point, and that was fun, because I was getting to edit together some scenes for that. And there was still a green screen in the background, and they like hadn't added the special effects yet. So the actor's like throwing this, like, eventually it was a green orb, but in the video that I was cutting, he was throwing nothing and making these very dramatic faces as he's like flying across the room. And actually, often the stunt double was still in the footage when we got it. So it was the wrong guy. So you were making like a rough draft of the trailer, and you're like, that's not the star of the movie, because later they would like superimpose him and put him in there. Anyway, yeah, it was extremely cool to get to work on that kind of stuff, because in Colorado I was working on documentary film, and a lot of the stuff we were doing was like kind of undercover. So the footage was like hit or miss. Like sometimes they would have like a camera just like around somebody's neck and they were just like walking around pretending they weren't filming, but they were. So the footage is kind of, sometimes it was a hot mess and you had one to choose from and like that's what you got. So you got to figure it out. Whereas when you're working with Marvel, they send you 5 different versions of something that is beautiful and perfect and that they spent $1 million on. So it's really neat because you're getting to work with something that's really like high art. And you get to choose the best take out of 5 incredible takes. So it ups the ante. And on a trailer, the whole thing ends up being like 30 seconds or a minute. So you're taking, 2 hours worth of really beautiful content and then taking the best minute and using that as your trailer. So yeah, you're really working with like the best of the best, and that's really neat.
Do you have a favorite superhero?
Oh, do I have a favorite superhero? I got into Black Panther. I thought that was really cool. Actually, we got to work on that one at the trailer studio where I worked, and yeah, I thought that was extremely cool.
I agree. R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman.
I know.
That was a very sad day to learn of his passing because Black Panther's up there for sure. Obviously because of that character in and of itself is a very cool character and the whole world building of Wakanda that they did around the character. But then, in the real world, just what Black Panther as a character and that movie coming out meant to so many people.
I agree. That part to me is just phenomenal. Who's your favorite superhero?
Well, all of them is not a really good answer. So I would honestly probably have to say Batman. I know that's a little cliche, but I do love Batman.
Nothing wrong with Batman. What do you think of the Joker movie?
Wow, that's a whole can of worms.
Yeah, it is. I really liked it, and I did not watch it for like a year or 2 years or something, and then I finally was like, okay, do it, watch the movie, and it astounded me. I thought it was great.
Listen, I think there's things you can pick apart about any movie,
yes.
But I thought as a whole that it was a very good movie, and if for no other reason than Joaquin Phoenix's performance was on a whole other level.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, I have a whole new respect for him. Although he's really good, even if you look at like his very, very, very early films, even those are like fantastic.
Yeah, my OCD brain so wishes that DC Universe could have had a more put together cinematic universe similar to Marvel, and that we could have gotten some of these characters and stories and in the way that Marvel did it. But as I begin to consume more commentary around Marvel as a company and the film industry, kind of realizing that maybe even Marvel themselves didn't plan out how it was going to be. Like, they didn't realize it was going to be like this, I should say, from the very beginning, and they kind of found their way into it. But I've grown to become more fascinated by some of the, how the different inner workings of the industry go and how deals get done and why certain studios have certain rights. Like, for example, Sony having the rights to Spider-Man and all that stuff. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's all very complicated, and having gotten to live and work in LA, every job exists. Like, even the really minute things in a movie that you're like, I wonder who does. Like, someone is in charge of what vest are they gonna wear, and that's a job. It's there's somebody whose job is to figure out how to get the rights to blah 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 piece of music. It gets. There's somebody's job is what food are they gonna eat, and it's just amazing how specific of a niche that you can get if you're in that world. It's all very complicated. It takes a village. Even on my little, call it little, it's not that little anymore, but on my project, it's certainly not just Taylor made a podcast. I have 2 editors who are out of this world talented who are helping me. I have 67 actors. I have quite a few composers. I have singer-songwriters. Very quickly it turns into this giant thing that takes a lot of really talented people. You can't just be okay, let's just do all the pieces, because you're not good at all the pieces. You bring in people who are better than you at those things, and you have them help you so you can create something really cool.
And so you're kind of in the role of director, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that something you have a lot of experience with?
I have some experience directing, but it's one of those things that most people don't get to be a director until they're 30 years into their career, or their parent is a famous director and then maybe they can be a director. It's not easy to just be a director, but fortunately when you're creating your own project, you can be whatever you want. But really, most of my experience is producing, so like the organizational part, and editing. So writing, I had no experience, so that has been a really interesting learning curve. And the directing part has always been something that I love. I just haven't had that many opportunities to do it. So it's been really cool to get to do that full time for a while.
Yeah, and as, bringing it full circle, as we kind of talked a little bit about up top, it's that idea of just, especially when you're creating something like what you're doing, having to wear so many different hats. But I bet that's also a cool experience too. I know I always enjoy when I get to kind of try out a new skill or learn something new.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've learned so much. And as you mentioned with the Charlotte Podcast Festival, there's so many things that it's like, how do I license this piece of music? How do I put this thing on iTunes? There's so many weird pieces that like you don't even think that you need to know until you're there and you're like, oh, I guess I should learn how to do that.
Yeah, and I like to think that maybe some of my skills could transfer over into being on the set of a movie scenario, but I think I would probably be best suited. I think I'd be the guy. I'd be really good in that role of getting people food and picking out the food they eat.
That's called craft services. It's a job. It's an important job. I love food too.
It's a very important job. I know how much it means to me in my daily life when I'm able to figure out what I'm going to eat. So craft services. All right. Well, if anyone's listening that's in craft services, you want to hook your boy Corey up with a job.
I got to have a meeting with one of the head honchos at HBO while I was living in LA, and he said that he had like 10 years of experience in Boston before he moved to LA, and then he came to LA and they're like, well, your resume doesn't really matter because it wasn't in LA, and he did craft services for years, and then eventually got his break, and now is one of the people who head up HBO. So it's a weird industry. It's a lot about like right place at the right time and working really hard and saying yes to even crazy things. And, it's, yeah.
Yeah. And we joke, but you don't want to deal with a hungry actor.
No, and really, it's like a legal issue if you don't feed them at like exact times because of the most of them are in unions. So if you don't feed them at the exact time, then like that's a lawsuit, not just like inconvenient.
I know. I said like 20 minutes ago we were going to wrap it up, but I've super enjoyed our conversation, and to be honest, all this talk about craft services and food is making me very hungry. So I suppose I should start thinking ahead about lunch and whatnot, which, I say thinking ahead, but let's be honest, I'm always thinking about what I'm going to eat next. So.
Well, it's been great, Corey. Thank you for this.
Yeah, of course. Before I let you go, where can our listeners follow your work and learn more about you and Foreward?
Yeah, well, if they want to go to forewardpodcast.com, it's spelled Foreward. They can find the trailer there. They can subscribe. I'd highly recommend subscribing because then you're going to be the first person to hear it. It takes a little while to go up on iTunes, so if you're subscribed, it'll immediately hit your inbox. You won't have to go looking for it. We have an Instagram, we have a Facebook, we have a YouTube. So, anywhere that you look for Foreward Podcast, you ought to be able to find it.
Everyone go check out Foreward. Go listen to this audio drama series that Taylor and her entire team have labored over and created. I've only heard the trailer, but just from that, I have no doubt that I'm going to enjoy listening to it. I'm very excited to check it out. Can't wait to listen to it. So I really encourage everyone to do the same. And Taylor, I just have to thank you again so much for coming on the pod today and for being so open about your story. I genuinely got a lot out of our conversation. I really appreciated it. I appreciate your willingness to talk about all those different things. And like I said before, I really believe there's a lot of healing and power within art and creativity. And so you and everyone you've worked with on Foreward, your collective willingness to put something out like that, I believe ultimately is going to have a positive and healing effect on those who listen.
Yeah, I sure hope so. Thank you, Corey. This has been great.